how to use all the tools and systems. And the actual system itself was very, very similar to previous BioWare engines that we'd worked with. So it wasn't too hard to figure out how to implement the content into the game. A lot of the tool set structures and data structures were very, very similar to things that we'd done back at Black Isle Studios, so that was a big help. As an example, we had an established dialogue editor that we understood. And all of these elements helped set the foundation for future projects we did as well. So what was life with Star Wars like? Well, I will be the first to say that when it comes to a science fiction genre that I would want to work in, Star Wars was not at the top of my list. In fact, the prospect of working on Star Wars was a very, very cringe-worthy experience. So when our CEO goes, oh, you know, we've landed the sequel to doing Knights of the Old Republic 1, my reaction to that wasn't necessarily a whole burst of joy. I have a lot of issues with the Star Wars universe, I'm not going to lie. I'll probably end up getting various hate mail from LucasArts PR after this. But let me start off by explaining how we approached the story and what the story was for Knights of the Old Republic 2. So the basic storyline for the game was that the player is a fallen Jedi who we nicknamed the Exile. Because in a fully voice recorded game, you do want the player character to have a nickname just so everyone can talk to him and use that nickname so it seems like they're actually addressing that person. The player is responsible for an atrocity that occurred a few years before Knights of the Republic 1. And it was basically a Hiroshima-level act at the end of the Mandalorian Wars, which was a very famous wars that took place in the Old Republic universe, which actually I don't know if I explained or not, but Old Republic takes place like 4,000 years before the actual Star Wars, like episodes 1 through 6. And that in itself is an awesome thing, because once you start divorcing yourself from all the continuity that takes place in the Darth Vader era, that allows you a lot more freedom of movement. So that was a huge plus. So the player is responsible for this tragedy, and he's also responsible for all the events that end up getting spawned from that tragedy. And all of those events start coming after the player once Knights of the Republic 2 starts. The game's primary goal was for the player to confront that event and to confront that tragedy that he caused, and also face all the enemies and all the characters that also had their lives touched by that act. So what was it like having a relationship with the Force? Well, the Force is a very tricky person to date. The game focuses very much on how the player deals with his connection to the Force. It's a very easy thing to deal with because I basically hate the idea of the Force in Star Wars. And I'm not talking about midichlorians, and I'm not talking about the speech that Yoda gives in Empire Strikes Back, which I think is beautiful. What I hated about the Force was the fact that it was this predestination power that ultimately governed all the Jedi and Sith movements, drove them to massacre each other, change the face of the galaxy, and all of it felt so very predetermined that giving yourself over to this higher power and this higher force seemed to be a way of just giving up your individuality as a character. And that was a very, very easy concept for me to hate. So the questions I started examining with that hatred in mind was, what do Jedi and Sith lose when they end up embracing the Force? And what does the player character and other characters in the game gain by turning away from the Force entirely? So it ended up spawning a lot of hate, but ultimately a lot of good things came out of it. So I started channeling that hatred, and I created a series of characters that end up reflecting that hatred I have of those aspects of the Force, and tried to examine each of those from the extremes. One character in the game, the player character, had consciously turned away from the Force, although the truth of the matter is the motivation for why he turned away from the Force, or why she turned away from the Force, is something that the player can choose over the course of the game. It's largely psychological. Another primary character in the game had the Force stripped away from her, so she could no longer feel her connection to it, and she had to deal with all the struggles that came as a result of that. Also, one of the characters who ended up being our primary adversary was completely consumed by the Force, so much so that he lost all individuality whatsoever. He became basically more of a presence in the game, much more of a force than an actual speaking character. And this villain was very, very easy for me to hate because of that choice that he'd made. So I'm going to show you a little bit of footage from Knights of the Old Republic 2.
Can I just stop you there, Chris?
Oh, sure.
You talk about the player's motivation, or sorry, the actual player itself, the theme for the player character being that stepping away from the Force, that they had consciously left the Force. Obviously, there's a bit of a problem in games and interactive narrative where things are forced onto the player. Say, for example, you're this brutal space marine and someone's like, well, I don't want to go and kill everyone. How do you combat it when you're saying to the player, look, you've turned away from the Force, that's how your player starts off, when the game is actually focused on building up these kick-ass powers, and that's exactly what players want to do. What they're doing is racing to get their powers up as much as they can. How did you sort of combat that and get them to get the system to still work well and to have the motivation there to get the Force powers up, but still have that character and the player want to feel like they had turned away from the Force for a valid reason?
That's a good question. Actually, we used some smoke and mirrors for that, where we didn't explain what had happened to the player within the first few hours of gameplay.
Right.
So basically, what we sort of gave the player character was a sense of, you designed your character, you've chosen your career choices, but you don't actually have any Force powers yet. During those first few hours, you do start slowly getting those back, but the reasons for why you're getting those back or why you lost them in the first place, we use smoke and mirrors and we don't actually explain it, so we leave you wondering.
Cool, thanks.
Also, and to be fair, another reason we chose to do that factored into the whole theme and motivation, we had a very real problem coming off of Knights of the Republic 1 in the sense of, by the end of the Knights of the Republic 1, like, players are expecting to be able to do these fantastic things with the Force and engage in lightsaber battles immediately. We have the challenge of having to reset the game and go, okay, well now we still have to have the player have the sense of progressing, but we have to explain why he won't have all these incredible Force powers right from the outset, which to be honest is pretty unbalancing. So that was another motivation behind it too. Let me introduce two of the characters from Knights of the Republic 2. We may want to bring the lights down a little bit for this as the actual footage is a little dark. The two characters I'm going to be showing is the primary antagonist, Darth Nihilus in Knights of the Republic 2, and his quote-unquote apprentice, Visas Mar. Sorry, let me completely destroy the cinematic experience by explaining something really quick. That toilet bowl noise you hear is actually Darth Nihilus speaking. One of the conscious choices we made with that character was we wanted him to feel so completely removed from everyone else around him that we didn't actually give him a voice actor who would represent the things he was saying. In essence, what would happen is whenever Darth Nihilus was on stage, he would have this sort of alien VO that he would use, and then the characters around him who could feel the Force could interpret what he was saying and what his wishes were. We felt that by giving him that sort of tone and that voice quote unquote, would help him feel more nebulous and more like a force of nature as opposed to an actual character that you can reason with. And I'll go into that a little bit more later.
It was difficult to make out, my lord.